Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, lace up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. Hey everybody, so I'm sitting here with my first guest in my season of guests, Emily Sukenik, who I came to know apparently like 25 years ago, a long time ago, in the theme of ordinary people, extraordinary circumstances, and in the theme of people connected to Barb, and in the theme of what do you do when life throws a lot of stuff at you? Emily is a logical first choice. So I came to know Emily when she competed in Concord High School track and field. And she was a good high jumper. And she comes to me in the locker room at the beginning of spring with a lacrosse stick in her hand to let me know she wasn't doing track. And I was really mad. One of my little crabby Barb moments. But she kicked ass in lacrosse. It was the right choice for her. The following summer, we were on Main Street at this little downtown Market Days event. And I had a pie booth for my cross country team. And Emily was sitting at the table with me. And she goes, I think I'll do cross country. And I could just say the rest is history. So we spent a season together where she ran cross country. And then she graduated and went off like everyone does. I next became reacquainted with her when I was late night scrolling on my phone. And I saw Emily walking between two trees on what looked like a tightrope in front of a house on the side of a road. And I thought, what is she doing? And what she was doing was acquainting herself and becoming a pretty successful highliner. Emily epitomizes sometimes so many themes of my life, which is you grow up and you have an idea of what you're supposed to do or what you might do. And then you take a few steps and something happens that sends you completely off course. And now you're doing something different. And then some great thing happens, but that's not what you're supposed to be doing. So you re-step and you go back and you try this again. If I followed Emily on a retrace of her life, we'd go all over the place. So Emily, welcome to 1,000 Tiny Steps.
Thank you, Barb. I'm so happy to be here with you.
What are your recollections of how we came to know one another in early 20s aspects of your life and the highlining and the traveling and that sort of thing?
I remember running track and absolutely loving that with you. I went to a few of the summer camps that you had. Yeah, I was definitely a sprinter back then, and I was pretty good at high jump. I didn't think I was that good, but I remember Melanie Lloyd was a good friend of mine, and she was on the cross country team, and she was just raving about it and how fun it was and what a group of girls, and you guys were all so close. And I was like, oh, I want to be a part of that. So I decided to try it, even though I was really afraid of the long distance aspect. As you know, 2 weeks in, I decided I wanted to quit because it was too hard.
I remember.
And you were like, you just looked at me and you were just like, nope, just matter of fact, you're not quitting. Like, really? Okay. So I stuck with it. And I think it was actually 3 seasons I was with you. I'm pretty sure. And I really grew a ton, not only in my long distance running, but also just learning what I was capable of, because that was really hard to go from never running something, a 5K, to being able to do it without even thinking twice, And that was kind of the beginning, I think, for me when it came to what I was capable of. So I really attribute a lot of that part of me to you.
Yeah.
And yeah, then I graduated. I ended up moving out west to California, where I started working at a rock climbing gym. And in there were slack lines. And for those of your listeners that don't know what that is, it's kind of like tightrope walking, but it's a stretchy webbing material that moves around and is wobbly. So it's challenging in that way. You have to control the line. And I just started doing it for fun. And I saw this video of this girl named Libby, who was the first woman to ever walk this high line in Yosemite called the Lost Arrow Spire. And it just was so inspiring to me to see her do that. And she fell over and over and over and over again. And I just was in awe. So I was like, oh my God, okay, I want to do that. I trained for 3 months. The owner of that gym was a highliner. So he's like, yeah, I'll take you up there. I was like, okay. And this line was 3,000 feet above the valley floor. Hours to hike up there with big backpacks full of gear. And you have to stay overnight. It was really windy. So I grind my teeth really bad. the night before I walked this line, I ground my teeth so bad that I like broke a molar. That was the beginning of my highlining. I ended up walking that line the next day on my second attempt.
So explain for a minute. You've said a couple of things that as a novice highliner, you were talking about this woman Libby and how she had walked it and that she fell a million times. So I'm thinking she plummets 3,000 feet to the, like, how do you get back up if you fell 3,000 feet?
So you're wearing a harness, and attached to the harness is a leash that then connects to the line and drags along behind you as you walk. And so if you fall, ideally you want to catch the line so that you can easily get back on it. But sometimes that doesn't happen and you fall onto the leash and you swing underneath it. It's called a whipper. And then you have to climb that rope and get back on the line. So it's a lot harder. And my first attempt on that line, I did a whipper and I had to climb back up. And being my first big high line, it was not fun.
Now, did you continue along or did you scurry back?
I scurried back to the beginning. And then I actually don't think I tried again until the next day because I was so overwhelmed with what had happened.
Yeah.
It's a total mental game because you can walk a line, that line was 50 feet long. I could walk that no problem in a gym or in a park.
Yeah, because underneath you is, the floor or a
Right.
rug or a mat. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. So you walked it the next day.
hmm
So you get across, do you have to walk back?
That's the goal. Yeah, you want to walk it back and forth. I couldn't do it. I had to scurry back. My body was exhausted and
Yeah.
filled with adrenaline, and I wanted to, but I was on this spire by myself and I was just terrified to step out. On the way there to the spire, somebody held my hand and let me kind of like walk out a little bit and released me. And I just couldn't do it on the way back.
So would you sit and just wrap yourself around the?
Yep. You just wrap yourself and you kind of like, it's called Tyrolean, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of hand over foot back to the beginning. Yeah.
Right. That's still, I'd still be impressed watching someone do that. So when you tell me this story, I go back to a couple of times that I knew you, a couple of experiences we had when you were in high school. So the first one was there was a social dilemma. He said, she said, boyfriend, girlfriend, girls being girls talking about each other. And you came to my house and just said, look, I just need to talk to you about this. And what I remember starkly, besides the bat that was flying around my kitchen while we were talking, how impressed I was that you had the gumption to just come to my house and say, hey, I need to talk to you about this. Here's what's happening. I don't want you thinking something about me if you haven't heard my side of it. Like, I don't know too many people still that would have just gotten in their car and come to their coach's house and had this conversation. And, I know that I'm not as unapproachable as many adults, but still, that was my role and that was your role. And then the other memory I had, which I think I shared with you at the time, was your college essay about running up Mount Kearsarge, because one of the things I have the girls do is run up a mountain. And it's 3 miles uphill. It's a long time. It's not easy. People's goals would be not to walk, and sometimes you couldn't. But it was one of those things where you have to step out of your comfort zone. So when I listen to you talk about this, I can see little Emily, being willing to step out of her comfort zone more than once, which I don't know that I would have made that connection otherwise hearing along. So how long did you continue into the highlining?
I highlined for about 4 years, ended up walking over 100 lines total highlines. I ended up moving to Moab for that reason because this is a big place for highlining. There's a lot of beautiful canyons and it's fairly easy to set them up. And it was becoming a mecca for that. So I moved here in 2010. Really enjoyed the highlining here, got more into rock climbing, pushed myself in that way, and ended up getting sponsored within some highlining realms with different companies. And it was a big adventure. It really was. And I was 22 to 25, 6, somewhere around there. And thinking back on it now, it's like a completely different lifetime because I haven't highlined in a long time. Sometimes I even forget about it. And people are like, wait, didn't you do that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful though. I mean, and I'm sure you have a million memories that wouldn't even come into my head as experiences on a highline. I'm caught up in how high up I would be and how petrified I would be, but you must have seen the world from a perspective that no one else gets to see and probably met pretty amazing people. The world sees, the highline and the beautiful spires and the canyons and you way up there, but there's probably a whole bunch of other stuff that we don't see.
Oh, absolutely. Even Moab itself is like that. It's hard to explain to people what it's like to live in a little isolated adventure desert town. We all live our lives in a very different way than most people do. You can try any adventure sport you want here. You can try highlining, climbing, skydiving, river rafting, mountain biking, four-wheel drive. And for some reason, people that come here are really drawn to pushing themselves outside of their comfort zones and
Yeah.
scaring themselves a bit. And for me, that's what I loved the most about highlining was that I was terrified, and I can even feel it right now thinking about it, sitting on the end of a line, knowing that I absolutely needed to walk it. I needed to try it. And also not wanting to at the same time.
Oh, I can
Um,
get it. I think
so
every competitive athlete in the world can relate to that exact feeling. Like right
yeah,
before the gun goes off, right before the music starts, before a dance, like whatever it is, it's like, why do
mhm.
I do this?
Why am I going to terrify myself in this way? But then, you fight your way across the line. You have to focus completely on the moment itself and your own body and the line. And there might be distractions like wind or people talking on the side of the cliff, or a thought comes into your head that's terrifying. And you have to like hone back in on the moment in such a way where I remember some moments where it was just complete silence. And I felt so powerful and so strong. And I would have this mantra that I would say, like, this is what you do. You can do this, or I would say these different things to myself to make it across. And then that feeling when you finish, as I'm sure you know with running, it's like, I just did that,
Yes,
you
yes.
know,
Yeah, yeah,
incredible
yeah.
feeling.
That aspect of your life ended. Keeping in your mind as we continue our conversation, were obviously a lot of aspects of Emily that got you into something like that in the first place. There are millions of women who will never set foot on a high line that had very similar upbringings and lives that you did, and yet you ended up there. So that's always what's intriguing to me. Like, why in a room full of 20 people will somebody do whatever they do? So you finished the highlining, and then, so mid-20s, what happened to you after that?
So towards the end of my highlining career, I got married, and I also got chronic Lyme disease. And at the time, I didn't know what was happening. I was experiencing tons of symptoms that I couldn't put my finger on, and doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. Just an example were fatigue, migraines, dizziness, blurred vision, achy muscles, anxiety, rashes, the list went on. And I went 5 years like that before I was able to find out what was wrong. Highlining was one part of my life where I was pushed to my physical and mental limits. And
Yes.
then I got sick, and I really had to use those skills to get through that period of time because,
Right.
when you're sick, those around you can be there for you as best as possible. But in reality, it's really just you,
Right.
you know?
Yes. That's the
So,
nature of human suffering in
yes,
general. At the end of the
no,
day, I have me, you have you.
that's
Yeah.
it. Like,
Yeah.
I relied a lot on my ex-husband, but he couldn't fix me. He couldn't be there every moment of every day. So it was a lot of getting through the pain, trying to go to work. I did go back to school at that time, and I was going to school as well. So I was really just trying to live amidst all these symptoms. So I'm very proud of being able to get through that 5 year period, because there were times where I did not want to go on. And now looking back, it's like, okay, well that made me even stronger. Now
Yeah.
I have skills.
Yeah. It's interesting. We get drawn to different people in our lives, and I have a handful of people in my life, I would say five, probably five or so, that are long-term Lyme, chronic Lyme sufferers or have that in their history. I have a good friend, Susan. She's wonderful. And so much of her energy is around the next treatment that might help her,
Mhm.
the next organic treatment, the next physical activity, the next diet plan, like so many things. And the other common thread, I find this with all my Lyme friends, but the other common thread is all of those symptoms, any symptoms that women have that involve anxiety and blurred vision and all the things that can be equated to stress are often dismissed as that. Heart
Mhm.
attack symptoms, grief symptoms. Oh my gosh, oh, here, take some Xanax and find a therapist and go on your way. And
Yeah.
maybe both of those things are helpful in mitigating symptoms of anxiety or whatever. But did you ever feel like unlistened to or not believed?
Oh yes, absolutely. I ended up going to see like a naturopathic integrative doctor because I was not getting anything out of Western medicine with that issue. They would do tons and tons of tests on me and everything looks fine,
Yeah.
nothing's wrong with you. And then I knew something was wrong with me, but not receiving answers from those doctors, I think certain people in my life thought I was lying or that I was not maybe not lying, but that it was
Exaggerating or
anxiety or exaggeration or something like that. The whole Western medicine thing is a topic on its own, right? But
oh, no kidding. Oh yeah.
this
Yeah.
integrative doctor in Phoenix, Arizona, she was the one that ended up saving me and getting me back to a place where I can feel like a normal human being.
So how many years ago was your the onset of symptoms?
The onset of symptoms was around 2013. And then 2018 is around where I was diagnosed or a test came back that said I had Lyme. And then it was maybe a year or two of healing after that.
So are you relatively symptom free now? Do you have triggers that send you into sort of episodes of symptoms?
I do. Yeah. Stress, overexerting my body, certain foods will trigger me and cause inflammation, and then I'll have symptoms resurface. But overall, I feel pretty normal, which is such a blessing.
Right. I think the hardest thing, what resonates to me in this anyway, is how difficult it is to be going through something and not have an answer for why it's happening. And so there's nothing to sort of not blame your symptoms on, but I guess that's what the word that comes to mind. Like I think of a spouse trying to support their spouse with Lyme disease, and if you knew right away what you had, then you wouldn't have to apologize for being anxious or not sleeping or throwing up or itching or needing a dark room because your head is pounding, because all of those things would have a cause. And the
Yeah,
cause wasn't you.
wasn't me.
Right.
That's such a good point. I remember the first time I ever got an aura that you get
Oh,
before a migraine.
yeah.
And I was telling my husband, I was like, something's not right. There's black in my vision. I don't know what's wrong. I'm dizzy. I don't feel good. And I remember him kind of dismissing that because he had been so used to my symptoms at that point that he was kind of just like, but to me, it was a really big deal. I had
Right.
never had that happen. And so I felt in that moment that he didn't care. And maybe that's not the case. I don't want to point fingers, but that was a moment where I did feel kind of alone. And I
Because
felt,
it's a here we go again moment from their perspective. All right,
yes.
here's another weird symptom she claims she has. I have classic migraines, and so they're the ones that are maybe 5 or 6 hours in duration, but they start with the aura. And mine is squiggly lines. So think of a cartoon that's showing a TV that doesn't come in like a screen in the like zigzag lines.
Oh,
That's what my aura is, and it will be off to the side, and they sort of rotate like this. And if I turn, the aura follows, like if I go like this, it goes over here. Like
wow.
I probably have the aura part of a migraine 3 or 4 times a month still. That must have been incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it really was. It was a hard time. And I think that the illness played a large portion in our splitting up because
Yeah.
it was just so much for us both to deal with. Sometimes you just can't come back from things.
No, no, no. I get it. I get it. Even if you want to. Sometimes it takes too much out and it's just too hard. I listened to another podcast, and this particular person had a marriage that didn't work, and she knew what she had. But when it's such an overwhelming illness, and everyone, sometimes too, I think people want to help. And when their efforts don't work, the frustration gets pointed to you, not to the
Yeah.
fact that it's not working. And that's unfortunate. That's the same thing with child loss. I have most of my close friends from before Molly died. They still love me. I still feel loved by them, but I don't get called to hang out. I just think, 8 years later, I'm still that unknown. Is she going to cry about Molly in the middle of dinner? Probably I wouldn't now. For a long time, I couldn't control when that would happen.
Yeah.
And people just pull away. I just wrote a blog post about that. It's not their fault, but it certainly does leave you in charge of not only your symptoms, but making sure your symptoms don't make anyone else uncomfortable.
Oh, yes. That was a huge part of it. I remember in the beginning, I had no awareness. I was just constantly spewing my symptoms because
Yeah.
I was so confused and so upset and in pain. And looking back, I'm like, oh man, like I drove people crazy with that.
Yeah. Ugh. Split up. Now, was this all still living in Moab all this time, or did you travel around?
We lived in Moab together for a while, and then we moved to Sedona, Arizona, and we were there for 4 or 5 years. And that was where I was for the majority of my sickness.
Yeah. Sedona. That's on my bucket list of places to go see.
It's lovely. It really
Yeah.
is.
Do
Yeah.
you have a like a trigger connection to it now because you were sick there for so long?
I did at first, actually. And I also had a trigger with my ex-husband because we spent so much time together there. So the first time I went back, it was very, very hard for me.
Yeah, I
Um,
bet.
there was a lot of tears and emotion, but I went back about a month ago, actually, and I felt good. I felt a sense of peace. I did some of the hikes that we used to do together, and I felt just grateful for the experience rather than angry towards it.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So now you're maybe roughly 30?
Yes, I was around 30 because we ended up splitting up when I was 33. So, yeah, 30 to 33. We did move back to Moab together, and I was feeling a lot better physically, but our marriage was crumbling. And he ended up leaving. And that was an enormous moment in my life that, man, that was painful. That was really, really painful. So the next few years were very hard for me in regards to figuring out who I was without
Right.
him, making new friends and being independent. And I remember I desperately wanted to fill the void of him. So I was just trying to like find somebody to fill this void for me. And that clearly did not work out. It never does.
No, no. No, it does not.
Yeah. So it was just like a nightmare. I ended up moving back to New Hampshire a few years later because I wanted to be close to my family, but I was also really just emotionally exhausted. I ended up having like a massive mental breakdown in New Hampshire.
When you were married, and I follow you on the socials, of course. Remember the marriage ending? Was the divorce or was him leaving, did it surprise you? I mean, obviously any relationship ending hurt, but there's different ways that it comes. Like whenever I've been like dumped out of the blue, it decimates me because I wasn't expecting it. Of course, always once things settle down, you realize, okay, I guess I kind of knew this was coming. Like sometimes perspective. But I know for me, whenever anything goes wrong, the immediate thing I do is look inward, like what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
What I do wrong, what I do, and try to fix it. Like,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't fix who's left me or what's broken, I can just lose myself in this place of almost like self-hatred. Like, what did I do this time? Like, what did I do? You talk about how much you were hurting, like really, really hurting. Was it the ego hurt? Like, or was it more like those tapes that play from how we grew up? I mean, I don't know if all
No,
this makes, if you know what I'm
no,
asking,
it,
but
it completely makes sense. So it was a shock to me because, well, I mean, looking back now,
yeah,
it should not have been a shock
right.
because we were drifting apart. We were having issues, but we weren't really addressing them. And so when he did say it, it was shocking to me in that moment. And I remember we sat there for 7 hours talking about it. Like, I was just devastated. I wanted to work it out. I wanted to go to therapy. I wanted to understand. When he left, I ended up writing him this big long email about, like, here's all the things that we can work on, and can we please go to therapy? And he was done. And it's been almost 7 years now since that happened. So I'm not in a bad place about it to talk about it. But at the time, it was like, how could he leave me? Man, yeah, that was rough. But now I see, like, okay, I'm happy for him. He went and did what he wanted to do with his life. And I also now am the most independent and strong as I have ever been
Right.
because he left. I learned how to do it by myself. I learned that I am capable. I don't need a partner
Right.
to be okay. And it's taken a while to get there. I mentioned that mental breakdown in New Hampshire where I was just so lost. But something shifted, and I said to myself, like, okay, this is it. Like, you have to do this. You have to learn to be okay. And I did. And I'm not perfect,
No, no.
obviously have my moments, and I
Yeah.
don't feel great and I don't feel confident, but overall, like, I can do it on my own, and that's an incredible feeling.
Yeah. So I don't need to dive into the any details you aren't willing to share, but I remember when you came back. So you leave Moab, you come back home. A change of location sometimes is wonderful. It doesn't always mean it's the right location or that you really needed it in a permanent way, but sometimes it stirs things up a little bit, which it sounds like it did for you. So can you talk a little bit about what happened here that really made you, sort of get to the point where you're like, you know what, I can't do this. I'm done. I need to
I need to
that.
get my shit together.
Yeah.
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 Um, so when I moved back home, I was staying in my parents' basement, which was lovely. And I have a wonderful relationship with my mother. But my father, and I don't want to get too deep into it because I respect my dad and
It's his
you know,
story.
it's
Yeah.
his story, but his presence in my life at that time caused me to revert to old patterns and behaviors and
Right.
feelings. It wasn't healthy. I got into a really unfortunate mental space and I ended up hopping into a relationship with somebody that made things worse. After that relationship ended is when I had my mental breakdown and I just lost it. But that was the turning point for me. I was like, okay, clearly there's something you need to work on here. There's things from your past with your father that you need to work on. There's things that you need to work on involving why were you with somebody that made you feel this way. And so I moved back to Moab and I got into this incredible therapy with this woman. She does internal family systems. I don't know if you've heard of.
Oh, I'm doing that now.
Are you?
Oh,
Crazy, huh?
yes.
Yeah,
Yes. And that generational abuse is like an over, but it's just patterns that go generation to generation that cause behaviors and realities and conversations and things that are just so unhealthy, even if the manifestations are different. But
absolutely.
yeah, oh my gosh, yes, anyway, keep going.
I was so lucky to find this woman, and I did a lot of work with her for about a year. And it really brought me to a space of not only peace, but also understanding of my father and his life and why he was the way he was. And then,
Right.
also my mother and her dynamics and my sister. And it was just incredibly eye opening and empowering. And I was really able to be on my own 2 feet as Emily,
Right.
with Emily, not Emily with my ex husband or Emily with someone else. It was
Or Emily as the daughter, or Emily as the sister, just Emily.
just Emily.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a lot of work on self love and self acceptance. And that was one of the biggest turning point, I think. And then it's kind of just been up from there in regards to my mental health.
Wow, that's amazing. Amazing thing is the internal family systems piece. So much of my own life, I had a recent experience with a close part of my day-to-day reality around drinking. We've agreed, so I tell everyone everything. So it's Kenny. So Kenny and I have agreed not to drink, right? At
Yep.
home. If I want to go out for dinner and have a drink with somebody, fine. And in my life, I've done AA several times, on and off, on and off. I was incredibly addicted to a variety of drugs after Molly died for about 2.5 years. So I have addiction in my life, but I also have the amazing ability to just stop, like I'm done, and I have the amazing ability to start up again. So it's
Mhm.
that double-edged sword. But in terms of alcohol, I don't like to have it in my house, and I don't like being a daily drinker. So I don't think about it. A few days of not having it here, and it's not in my mindset anymore. And that's not so true for Kenny. So we've agreed not to drink. I come home from my tap dance competition, and Kenny is clearly inebriated, like not safe drunk, but drunk. And Jack is screaming and crying. He's cried so hard he threw up, and the dinner is burning on the stove, and Kenny's completely out of control. Now, is he mean? No. Is he malicious? No. Is he purposely hurting anybody? No. But, you have a 4-year-old child who has no choice but to be in that house. So everything got rectified and all. But in my therapy session with Carolina and thinking about internal family systems and looking at more than once when I was describing the situation, I said, my father, not Kenny.
Oh, no
Like,
way.
and so it was this whole repetitive things are fine. I let my guard down, something bad happens. I had sexual abuse as a child. And so my pattern of behavior was when it would happen to me, okay, I'll burn my pajamas. Okay, I'll take those sheets off the bed and throw them in the Merrimack River. Like I would do these things that I thought would mean it would never happen again. Like I had to fix things or change things. And
Mhm.
months would go by and it wouldn't happen again. And I would let my guard down and I would stop thinking about it, and then boom, it would happen again. So of
Uh,
course I thought it was because I let my guard down, right? Not that my sick abuser just had like a 6 month cycle of being mental in his head, right? So I have this ability and willingness to be vigilant, like live in vigilance. It's on, he's a good father, he's a good father, he's this, he's this, he's this. So the pattern was identical and it was eye-opening to me. It doesn't, addressing the alcohol situation is a whole separate thing, but so much of the 90 minutes I spent talking to Carolina was about my response and my reality around we've had 2 dry months and boom, he gets drunk
yep.
and oh my God. So I need to do this, and this. Carolina's like, no, no, it's not because of you that any of this happened. It's how we just revert back to, like when you talk about the Emily of Emily, like Emily's Emily. I've never just been Barbara's Barb because I've always been sort of self in charge of making sure everything's okay and fixing everything and setting it all up and, so that
Yeah.
everything's okay. And
Yeah.
when everything isn't okay, the only person I can
And
really
it's your
look
own
is,
fault. It's your
yeah,
fault. This is another reason you and I really connect because I'm very similar in that way where in my household as a kid, I felt like I needed to tiptoe around and I needed to make sure everything was okay. If my father was upset, it's because I did something and I needed to fix that. So I needed to change that behavior, or I needed to be quiet, or I needed to be the peacekeeper or peacemaker or whatever, you know?
yeah, yeah,
So I totally understand that. And
yeah,
that's one of the biggest journeys I'm going through in my current therapy is
yeah.
that I don't need to be the peacekeeper anymore.
Right, right. Yeah. You're about 20 years ahead of me because my father, who was my abuser, my parents separated and then my mother remarried my father. Heart-wrenching for me at age 15. I'm like, how do you remarry someone that did this to me? Like, I
Yeah.
don't understand. He never abused anyone else. I mean, he got therapy and quit drinking and did a lot of good things, but it doesn't change the fact that this happened to me. And so he recently died, which is sad and all that. But in my family, people just expect that I'll do it. So I planned the funeral, made the programs, facilitated the funeral. I was like the pastor, like I did all of it. And it's like, why do I like the internal family? That was like Christmas for my therapist in terms of unwrapping all the levels
Yeah.
of why. Not
Why is
only
Barb doing this? Yeah.
yes, yes. And my family members' response, I have a couple of family members that I've talked to about it, is, well, we didn't make you do it. You chose to do it. We didn't make you do any. Like, okay, nobody did anything. Like I did nothing for 3 days. And then I got yelled at because the obituary didn't make it in the paper in time for everyone to know. Like,
Uh-huh.
well, why were you waiting for me to write the obituary? Like,
Yeah. Why are you the one that's expected? Like maybe they just had this expectation
well,
that,
it's there. When we get together as families, we tend to relive our family roles. I think all of us too are really good. Like I'm really good at stepping back and noticing everyone else's behaviors, but I don't see my own until, you know, till
yes.
my,
Oh no.
so it's like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, apparently. So it's just these conversations are so helpful. I know that based on the people I know that listen to this podcast, there's a bunch of people right now nodding their heads like, oh my God, that's me. Because I remember early on when therapy sort of started taking off and it wasn't so Freudian anymore. I'm old. I graduated high school in 81. So after I was molested and I told my parents and my parents got divorced and I went for therapy, it was the most unhelpful hour of the week. I don't think anyone really knew. Like this therapist stared at me and I'm like, are you going to talk to me? And she goes, no, you have control here. I don't have any control. I don't have control. Like I had no ability to talk because I didn't even know what to say. Like,
Yeah.
and I was sent to the expert on this. Well, I didn't feel like it was an expert.
I've been in
In
a
the
situation like that before where I was in therapy and she just said, well, what can I do to help? And I'm
Yeah,
like, I
I don't
don't
know.
know.
Isn't that your job?
Yeah.
Don't you listen to what's wrong with me? And then you say, try this? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's one of the biggest things with grief too. Dead Molly is like, well, what do you need? Well, I need Molly back. Well, okay, I can't do that, but what else do you need? Nothing. Of course, I need a million things, but that's not a question a grieving mother can answer for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So what I loved was I had a woman show up with groceries, and none of the food was anything I would choose. There was a loaf of Wonder Bread, Skippy peanut butter, and like jelly, just food I wouldn't eat. But she was a little bit older than me. It was totally her generation's comfort food, right? So I ate that entire freaking loaf of bread like in one afternoon. I just made peanut butter and jelly sandwich after peanut. It was the most helpful thing ever. I haven't eaten that kind of peanut butter and jelly sandwich since, but she just showed up with it. Here, I was at the grocery store and I just thought I would bring you food. But it is amazing. This was just a person, but yeah, I find a lot of current and modern therapy methods to be so much better. Yeah. And
Absolutely. I think you're
yeah,
right when you say it's therapy has come a long way.
yeah.
Long way.
So you have your breakdown, you leave New England. I was very sad about that. You went back.
I think it was about 2 years because I came back to Moab at the end of 2022. So it's
Yeah.
been about 2 years that I've been back here. It's been just a healing journey. I've been focusing a lot on my healing, and I've been spending a lot of time alone
Yeah.
with my dog and outside, and I make jewelry, and that's something that brings me a lot of peace. It's been less about finding someone or something to fill the void and filling my own void for myself. And sometimes it does get lonely. I kind of isolate myself a bit, but I think that's what I've needed for a long time, is to just be with myself.
Well, and you develop self-reliance that way
Hmm.
and self-acceptance. You can't
Yeah.
hate yourself all the time if you're only with yourself. That gets old
Right.
after a while, right?
It does.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
tell the world about your RV.
Oh, the RV.
This is your next bad relationship, right?
It is. Yes. But it's an object this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the beginning of 2020, so I was thinking about buying property or a house or something here, but it's incredibly expensive in Moab now. And it's just very, very difficult to find anything that would work for me. So I thought to myself, how about I get an RV? Because then I can park it where I want to park it. I will own it. I can move if I want to move. I'll have more freedom. And a lot of people live in RVs and vans here in Moab. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand about this town, is that people live in that way because then there's more freedom. Like I said, you can leave when you want,
Yeah.
and you're not tied down to someone's rent or a lease or things of that nature. So I made the choice to buy this RV, and it was a 91 with 65,000 miles on it, 65,000 miles. And I thought to myself, like, oh, this will be, you know, good. What I didn't think about was that when a vehicle has been sitting from the 90s and only has that many miles, it's just been rotting.
Right.
I've had to fix the entire thing. That's just not what I had signed up for. I had this like idealized view of what it was going to be like in my head. I'm going to be out there camping and it's going to be so beautiful and I'm going to see the sunset and I'm going to be drinking wine. And instead, I'm under the vehicle, like getting tendonitis, like wrenching on bolts. And I'm laughing about it now because I have to. I am trying to see it in a way where, like, now I know mechanics. I just spent an entire year learning mechanics. I'm happy about that aspect of it. I'm not happy about the financial burden, but it's been a big lesson. It's sitting outside right now. Like I said, I'm house sitting at the moment, so I'm inside, but it's right out there. It's got about 5 issues that need to be dealt with. And it's, yeah, a big, big lesson in patience.
Yeah. Yeah. Just so you know, I take great pleasure in watching your little videos that you post about what's broken and what needs fixed, and then you fixing it and covered in grease and you know, just I don't know, I just love it. It's just fun because again, you get into all these gender expectations and women aren't supposed to know how to fix things and oh, who are you going to get to help you? You're going to need someone to help you and all of the social expectations that go into how society tends to govern and control women, which is huge.
Uh-huh.
So traveling and being on your own, have you ever felt unsafe or have you, chosen places where you know people or
For the most part, I've felt pretty safe. Mainly when I'm here in Moab, I feel safe because I know the best places to be. Plus, it's a pretty safe town. When I was down in Tucson for a month and a half, that was more challenging for me because I had to seek out where it was safe and I really didn't know. There was one time where I was parking in this like trailhead parking lot for the night. 1 in the morning, two cops show up with lights and flashlights looking in my RV. And I'm like, oh no, like what's going on? They're like, ma'am, you're not supposed to be parked here. I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry, And they're like, just so you know, there was a double homicide in this parking lot last month, and a lot of unruly gatherings happen here. And I was like, oh
I'll
no.
be moving to the Walmart parking lot.
Yeah. So like the thing is you really just don't know sometimes where you're parked. That scared me, and that made me become a lot more aware of where I was. I'm very careful about locking my door now. My mom bought me this thing. It's like a taser and pepper spray all in one. I just have that with me if I'm walking at night or if I'm by myself.
Yeah.
Because you never know.
No, you don't. That's the sad reality. We try to set details up, for safety, trying to anticipate everything that can happen, but you can't. That's impossible. That's impossible. You make jewelry, which is wonderful. There's this assumption that if you're whimsical by nature and you're living in an RV, that maybe your plans don't go any further than next week. But where are you at in the life of Emily for Emily?
Hmm. I've really decided to pursue my jewelry. That's been my goal. And that's why I went to Tucson, because I was able to do weekend markets there and sell my jewelry and also make connections. And I worked on my website while I was down there. And I have my jewelry in a couple shops as well. So it's just kind of slowly growing. And then I have a couple side jobs as well that I work to make ends meet. But I really just want to work for myself. That's my goal. There's this one girl that I'm really inspired by. She's a local artist, and she's full-time jewelry, doing really well for herself. I'm kind of looking to her for mentorship in a way, because I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
how do you do this?
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you create your jewelry and do all of that in Moab and then travel around to sell it?
Yeah, I mean, I can create it anywhere I go. I use, as you might know, because you've seen pictures and stuff, I use a lot of wood, cactus wood.
Yep.
And that particular wood is found in southern Arizona. So that's another reason why I went down there. It's very unique wood that has all of these holes in it. And I can cut out different designs and shapes and sand it down and add beads. And I do a lot of earrings and necklaces with that. And yeah, so I'm constantly creating and bringing things to the shops that I sell them at. And I do a lot of markets here in Moab throughout the year as well. We have a lot of different events that go on. Yeah, it's like the life of a starving artist in an RV.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Oh my goodness. It's just so funny. The older you get, it's like climbing a mountain. When you turn around at the end of each calendar year, you have a bigger view because you're higher up. So I love when I run into people or connect with people or stay connected with people that I knew way back when, because it's fun to say, oh, when I had this conversation, I never knew that 20 years later, 21 years later, we'd be doing a podcast episode talking about this and that. I
Right?
love those. I love those realities.
Me too.
Yeah, they make me, well, they bring up a lot of emotions, but for the now of now, creating jewelry, selling it in shops where you live, traveling around. In wrapping up, is there anything, not that you need to have some big message, but is there anything that we haven't talked about or any experience you've had or anything that you'd like people to know about the Emily of Emily?
I think that we all have these expectations to live specific lives, reach specific goals, be specific versions of ourselves. And I think the reality is that life's going to throw things at you no matter what you're doing.
Right.
And it's going to throw you off course, and it's going to confuse you and cause pain and grief. And the only thing that you can really do is control how you respond to those things and how you see those things.
Right.
And one of my favorite quotes is by Wayne Dyer, and it's, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Because,
Yeah.
you know, I could look at a lot of these things in my life as negative, but like I'm really proud of what they've helped create, which
Yeah.
is this version of myself.
Yeah. Well, you're inspiring, and the common belief that mentors for people have to be people older than wiser than themselves is false, because I watch the things that you post and I read blog posts and I listen to your lives, and I never ever come away not learning something from you, which I love because it's one of my favorite things about getting old. Some of my best friends I met when they were like first graders and I was a teacher, and now we
Yeah.
hang out, and I love when I'm an old woman, I shall wear purple. I get into a lot of literature now about aging. And one of the biggest things that women are encouraged to do is to befriend younger women because our age and experience is helpful to younger women, but their understanding of the world in which they live is helpful to us. Like it's a totally mutual,
Absolutely.
relationship. So Emily's one of my mentors.
And Barb, let
So,
me say this. You were such an inspiration to me and still are. High school, I just looked up to you so much because you were so yourself all the time. You were just goofy and silly, and you would interact with us in a way that made us feel like we were your friend and that you were there for us. And that's why I felt so comfortable going to your house that day, being like,
yep.
hey, I really need to talk. And you just made me laugh so much, Barb. Like you, one of my favorite memories was we were running through St. Paul's as a team, and we're running down the road and a car is coming at us, and you are trying to decide which side of the road to go to, but you couldn't decide, and you looked like a squirrel, like trying to decide which way do I go? Which way do I go? I just have that memory in my head of you.
Yeah, that's about right.
That's
On
about
so
right.
many levels. Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's funny because running for me as a high school athlete saved my life. It was the first thing I ever did that I was really good at, and it gave me a way to escape all the demons in my head. And I never forgot the people involved in it. And that it's one of the things I miss most from my job loss in the district and all of that is the coaching young people, because it was just such a way for me to sort of give back to the community they'd given to me. So, well, I'm glad that I could be a good part of your experience. You're one of, I've coached hundreds and hundreds of girls, and I remember almost all of them, but some I remember really strongly, and you're one of them. And I think it was, well, it was a million things. I think we were supposed to be connected. So that whole universal direction, people are put in your life for a reason. I just always liked that you weren't predictable. I would come up with a summation of what I thought about you, and you would do or say something that proved me wrong. And I love that. And I think that's a theme in your life sometimes. Like, not that you set out to prove people wrong, but you'll do something and you'll prove them wrong, which is an empowering thing. And I think an important thing. So,
Thank you,
well,
Barb.
thank you for being willing to be on the podcast.
Yes, I'm thrilled. This has been
Yeah.
so fun. It's felt
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's a conversation with my old friend.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I like these to be. Do you have a website address?
Yeah, it's www.cactusandbloomjewelry.com. Yeah, I have an Instagram page that is Cactus and Bloom, but it's got like underscores and dots.
I want to thank Emily for coming on. I want to thank all of you for listening, and check her out. She's worth it. So as always, be good to yourself. So be good to yourself and go on her website and look at her jewelry, because that will make you feel better. Be good to someone else. Select a pair of earrings for your mother and order them from Emily. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.